There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you by the generosity of our friends with the Haverty family, the Illig family, the Kearney Warnell Foundation, UMB Bank trustee, the Sherman family, the Cockrell family, Kansas City Orthopedic Institute, Don and Mary Doherty, and the Bergman family. Thank you.
Welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, where we talk about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. Don't forget, get this podcast wherever you get your other podcasts, iHeartRadio, etc., and with Spotify. Also, we are on YouTube, so you can watch as well. Don't forget to like, listen, and subscribe. One of the great people in our town is Tom Wagner, been a long-time resident of Kansas City. He's written this incredible book. If you've ever wondered how we became the sports architecture capital of the world, it is all in this book, lined out for you, designed in Kansas City. They even have a timeline in there for you to show you the incredible architecture firms that are here, and then all the spin-off industries as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. Talk a little bit about Tom Wagner. You know, born, raised. Where'd you come from, Tom?
Yeah, so I was born in Illinois in the late 50s, and when I was a month old, my parents moved to Great Bend, Kansas. My father was in the oil business, and after 5 years there, I was in kindergarten, or finished kindergarten. We moved to Wichita, which is where his home office was. So from age 5, 6 through 18, I was in Wichita and went to high school there. And then when I finished that, I was off to Kansas State to architecture school.
Yeah, so how early was it in your life that you thought, I want to be an architect?
Yeah. So I can remember one time, and I think a lot of architects can probably tell a similar story. I decided to draw up a house that was the shape of an octagon. And then I guess I can remember that. I wish I had that drawing, actually. And I think in some ways, when I was 14, I had a chance to go with my mother and father to visit relatives out in Connecticut. And part of that trip was to spend the day in New York City. And I actually still have a poster that I keep in my home office that I had on my wall as a 14-year-old all the way through high school of the Empire State Building. And I think that was really a great thing for me to experience, having grown up in Kansas for the most part. And then when I was 16, an architect moved next door to us in Wichita, and I spent one summer helping him renovate his house, which was, hand him hammers and nails and screwdrivers and this and that. And that following summer, when I was 17, I had a chance to work in their office in downtown Wichita, which meant riding my bike every day, which was fine, right? 5 or 6 miles.
Back in the days when you could ride a bike.
When you could ride a bike. And that really opened my eyes to the industry and also where I might choose to go to school. And from then on, I never looked back.
So in English class, you weren't doodling on your paper, drawing your paper. Teacher comes down and rips the paper away from you. Those sort of things.
No, I tried to keep that to art class.
You did try to keep that to art class. And when did you decide? And I'm not sure I know the exact. We'll talk about the Roman Colosseum here.
Yeah.
Yes, folks, the Roman Colosseum. We will talk about that in a minute. But when did you decide it was the architecture of sports buildings or architecture like the Empire State Building?
Yeah. I think in some ways, when I was in college, I sort of self-minored in architectural history. I took as many classes as I could, and after college considered getting a master's in architectural history. And my history professor said, before you do that, Tom, you actually should go out and work for a while. And so I started my career at HNTB, which was a great opportunity for me to meet a lot of people.
Was that right out of school?
It was right out of school. I had during school, I'd spent 8 months in Hartford, Connecticut on an internship, which I lived with an aunt and uncle of mine. He was a retired newspaper man, and my aunt worked at a children's museum, and they had a big house, and I stayed with them for 8 months. And that was really wonderful because I really got to see a part of the world. I could go to the mountains to ski. I could go to Boston. I could go to Yale. I could go to Harvard. I could go to New York. And during that 8 months, I took the opportunity to go to a lot of those places and really experience something that was eye-opening for me. But it wasn't until I was working, my wife and I, we got married 40 years ago, and soon after we got married, I took an assignment with a small firm here in town. And we actually moved to Jamaica for a year and a half. I was an on-site architect for a resort hotel renovation and construction. And when I came back from that in 1987, I was a little antsy. I was a little anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, sports was really starting to take off. And the third largest firm, and I document all this in my book, sort of emerged, a firm called Ellerbe Beckett, which grew out of HNTB. And they actually had 3 projects that they had sort of hijacked in some way from HNTB. One was
You don't say stolen, do you? Okay, never
same
mind.
thing. But one was a new Boston Garden. One was the new Phoenix Suns basketball arena. And the third, which I was most interested in, was a renovation of Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And so that's something I really had the desire to do, was to work in New York. So
You know how amazing this is and how fortuitous it all was. You lived next door to an architect, okay,
Yes.
in Wichita. Then all of a sudden you have your aunt and uncle just happened to be
Right.
in Boston, and you go there and you are able to stay there and do it, and then be able to take a look at the other side of architecture first, which was probably where you were going to go.
Yeah.
But instead of, designing swimming pools,
Right.
Well, you probably do anyway, because a lot of
Yeah.
these arenas now do have swimming pools,
Right.
in them, especially in
Right.
college. But then all of a sudden you get on with a sports architecture firm. So.
Yeah. That was oddly enough. I had been a New York Knicks fan ever since I went to New York as a young teenager, and so the whole idea of Madison Square Garden was very attractive. Plus, just
Mythical place. I mean, it really is a mythical place.
I can remember walking through that vomitory the first time and saying, "Wow, this is what I've been watching on TV all these years."
So you better explain the vomitory before people take it a different way, okay?
Yeah. Well, the vomitory is the portal that leads from the concourse to the area, the seating bowl, and that's a Greek term. Vomitorium is where it derived from. But yes,
Interesting use of words there.
yeah, it is. If
the
you think
Greeks,
about how
okay,
people get.
And I'm sure it might have been vomitory a few times, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
right,
Yeah.
So you get in with Ellerbe Beckett.
Yes.
And you start your career. I'm sure you do, was the very first project you work on?
Well, the Madison Square Garden project hadn't really started. So my baptism to sports architecture was actually going back and forth to Washington, D.C. We were doing a study for Jack Kent Cooke for a new stadium in the district, and attended several meetings with him, which was utterly amazing. That guy, the way he commanded the room, all his employees, and certainly his hired architects. Another firm eventually ended up building the building because they had to look for sites. But I spent several months going back and forth to out to the stables and the farm where he made it a path to get you there just so he could let you know
who was boss. You're coming to me. I'm not coming to you.
He was the boss.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think your family visit to Rome.
Yeah.
2014. Okay.
Yes.
And I've seen many of the people that are listening to this have seen Gladiator.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think I forget the actor's name who steps out of the wagon where they're all prisoners, of course, because they're slaves.
Yeah.
And they're going to go fight to the death inside the Coliseum. And he stepped out of the carriage and said, "How could man build something so magnificent?"
Yeah.
And you saw it, and all of a sudden you probably said the same thing to yourself, especially, which I didn't realize, they had games in there for 500 years.
Yeah. That's
you
true.
think it's just for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
But the Roman Empire at that time, 500 years inside that same building.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when I was there, that's what I think really said to me. There was like a voice I heard that said, "You need to do this book," because I'd been talking about it or thinking about it for several years. And I think being in that building where so many things that were invented there, although a lot of that came from the Greek theaters, put two theaters together and you have a Coliseum in some way. I think it really spoke to me that it was so powerful, the things they had done there, structurally and physically, and the value of just the way the seating bowl was put together is exactly like we do today. And there was something there that just said, you have to go do this now. And so I came back and I started to actually do some research for just sort of part-time. Eventually I spent, I think, 7 years on the book.
Yes.
But yeah, that was the starting point for me.
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk about the dimensions inside. Dimensions inside are almost exactly like Arrowhead Stadium,
Yeah.
or like football stadiums.
Yeah.
Okay, we won't just single out Arrowhead for the time being.
Yeah.
We'll get back to Arrowhead and the Truman Sports Complex, which was very instrumental in becoming the sports architecture capital of the world. But
Exactly.
the other deal was they had the sunshade.
Yeah.
It was actually the first retractable
Right.
type
Right.
dome. Now, it didn't cover the gladiators. It
Right.
didn't cover the field of battle, of
Right.
conquest.
Right.
But it covered all the spectators.
Yeah,
And
it
the
did.
emperor,
It did.
included. And they were, how many soldiers did it take to pull the shade?
Historians think it was up to 1,000 Roman Marines that would actually pull big ropes and chains. And this thing was called a velarium. It was made of fabric, but it was retractable. And other Coliseums, because there were hundreds of Coliseums built throughout the Roman Empire, several other ones had this, but this was the most magnificent and probably the most difficult because of the scale of the building.
Right.
Yeah.
So it took 1,900 years
Yeah.
for us to
Yeah.
get a retractable dome.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
the Romans had it for 1,900 years
Yeah,
ago,
right.
which to me just, when I read that, I just went, that is
Yeah.
unbelievable. And we're renovating our stadiums or blowing them up and building new ones
Right.
every 35 years. This one stood for 500 years.
It did. It
And
did.
it still stands today.
Well,
I'm sorry.
it was
It's
active.
still standing.
Yeah. And at times there was people living in the building. There were plants growing in the building. It was pilfered. All the travertine marble, which is all gone now, and part of it ended up somewhere in the Vatican. It became like a Home Depot for materials. And it was, just the basic structures there. But it's beautiful. And it was damaged by earthquakes.
Yeah.
But, finally it actually got stabilized, and some rules and laws were put in place to save the building.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting too. We will fast forward now to the late 1800s, early 1900s to Osborne Engineering, and I think it was Frank Osborne, right?
Yes, that's right.
And out of Cleveland, Ohio.
Exactly.
And they actually were the first sports architects building stadiums in the entire country.
Yeah,
correct?
they were.
Yeah.
The research I did is fascinating. And I remember an article, I think, 20-some years ago, I think in Sports Illustrated. And I ended up researching and talking to a lot of their principals and put together a list that they were actually impressed with. I only missed one of their buildings that they hadn't designed. It started with the fact they were experts in poured-in-place concrete, which was becoming a new technique in the late 1800s. The old stadiums, which were mainly baseball parks, were built of wood, and many of them met their demise through fires.
Well, sure.
And so owners started to seek these guys as experts in concrete, knowing that the buildings would last forever. And eventually, Osborne figured out there was a market here beyond just being the engineers, and they eventually started to design a handful of stadiums and do the structural engineering.
Right, and it touched Kansas City, and it touched my old hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
That's exactly right.
But here it was Mulebach Field and then Municipal Stadium.
That's correct.
It was the Osborne Engineering Company that did that, right?
They did. And the list is amazing. The old Yankee Stadium, Lambeau Field, SMU's football stadium. I did a study for several years to try to save that building. And Notre Dame was probably maybe the most prominent of all those buildings they designed. Yeah.
And they designed Forbes Field in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And it was I think it was the first stadium designed for two sports, correct?
Yeah.
It was designed for the Pirates and for the Pittsburgh Steelers back in those days. And I can remember the stadium. I saw many a baseball game and a football game there.
Yeah.
Where, baseball, I think it was really almost built for baseball because your sight lines were great and the outfield fences and the whole thing. There were limited sight seats. They're behind the steel girders.
Yeah.
You had to look this way around the girder,
Right.
or you had to go this way around the girder, the whole thing. And they were just standing right up there supporting the roof because it was a double-decker stadium at that time. But then when they put the football stadium there, it was from the left field line to the right field line. There was no one watching from across the way because there's all outfield.
Right.
There were no stands there. Everybody else was jammed onto the other side of the stadium to try to watch a football game, which was not conducive.
Yes.
Yes. And I think you talk about this as well. Baseball stadiums are a triangle, okay? Football stadiums are a rectangle.
Yeah.
Made no sense to build dual stadiums, but they ended up building all these dual stadiums, didn't they?
Yeah, there were as you mentioned, there were several built in the 30s, 40s. One of the largest ever, I think, was in Cleveland. They could hold 86,000
Yes, right.
fans.
The old Municipal Stadium in Cleveland,
But I think it was finally decided, is there a better geometry? And so these concrete, they were called multi-purpose stadiums. And that's a fascinating story in of itself. But it was a round building. They were all round. They were all designed by different, different architects, except for, I think Osborne designed a couple of them along the way. But they were specifically designed to have these motorized seating sections, which with a push of a button, in theory, the seats would move. The closest one to Kansas City was Busch Stadium in St. Louis.
Right.
But they all had the same characteristics. A bit round, you couldn't tell where you were. It was all focused on the field. They were not really beautiful buildings, and the only one left standing to this day, there's two actually, is the Astrodome, and then the stadium where the A's just departed and moved to San Francisco or to Sacramento for this year.
Yeah, right, which is
Alameda.
amazing. Yeah,
Yep.
Alameda County Stadium.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
That place was a zoo. Terrible place to put a stadium because it's so close to the bay,
Yes.
the water. Every time it rained, everything backed up into what would be the
Yes.
dugouts,
Yep.
and then into the locker rooms, and it just
Right.
rats run. The other place was awful. Never mind. It was terrible to go there anyway to watch them play the Raiders
Right.
and their fans, but it was bad enough that the stadium was there as well. Then all of a sudden, it's the Truman Sports Complex.
Yes.
Okay, and Charles Deaton.
Yes.
Right. So if you
Yeah.
want to start
Yeah.
with Charles and his idea, which has changed the entire landscape
Yeah.
of sports architecture.
Yes. Before Charles Deaton, the city formed the Kansas City Sports Commission and Kansas City Sports, or the Jackson County Sports Authority. And the focus was get a stadium, it was called a stadium complex built of some sort. They looked at different sites for off and on in the 50s, and then in the mid to late 60s, the focus was we're going to build a stadium similar, it looked like, similar based on renderings to the Astrodome. Members went down from the Sports Authority and the Sports Commission, went down to Houston, to several other cities, and they all came back and said the gold standard appears to be there in the Astrodome in Houston. So HNTB, Black & Veatch, and Burns & McDonnell, the three big engineering firms in town, with I don't think any architects involved, did a study of almost 20 sites, and they ended up focusing on two sites. One is where the Kauffman Performing Arts Center is now built, and the other is where they built it. And the downtown site, Crossroads, eventually was rejected because there was no highway access. Right. It was poor. There were a lot of landowners, and there was no parking. So they decided on that location out there.
Yeah, the Leeds. You called that the Leeds location.
That's
right?
correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so sort of out of the blue, when they're starting to think about how we're going to get a building built, a domed building of some sort built, and there was no idea of a retractable. It was just going to be a domed stadium. This architect named Charles Deaton shows up at Jack Stedman's office and convinces him to get him in front of the Sports Authority, and he had an idea of not one but two stadiums. His history had been houses and banks in Colorado and a few western states. Self-educated, interesting guy. There's a book to be written about him by somebody, I think. But he had this idea, and he had apparently been out trying to talk to other cities about it. But the whole idea was you can build two stadiums for the price of one, which is nuts. And the other is, how about a big sliding roof that goes between the two to enclose them? And we've all seen, and I have some great photos and sketches of what that would have looked like. And there was a model built and all that. But
right, that rendering that you have in the book, okay, of the stadiums side by side, and then that roof sitting in the middle, waiting to cover either stadium for inclement weather, would have been, I don't know, they might have called it the eighth wonder of the world at that point, right? If something like that had been built. And it was just, I mean, the rendering is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And the stadiums ended up being built on the same geometry. They're very formal, which is, it's beautiful how they're laid out with one another and how you deal with the sun angles for baseball as well as football. But it was all set up to happen eventually. Deaton thought it would be a $3 million component. The bids came in at 18. And I think in some fashion, contractors had no idea how they were going to build something that big. Nothing had ever been tried or built like that. There was the architects had nowhere to look to say, oh, they built one of these in wherever. And there was a lot of mystery about how it actually would perform and actually be built.
Yeah, and the other thing is the weather here.
Yes.
Okay, we do have tornadoes.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
That was another component, right?
Yeah.
How are we going to keep this roof up here if a tornado comes ripping through here as well, right?
They actually apparently did some sort of wind studies, and over time they developed the architects developed different designs. It was Charles Deaton and Kivett Myers. Kivett Myers was the local firm. They were the big firm here in town, and they I think the two factions, sort of the two architects, argued over who would get the rights to patent it, should it become actually built, but it was never realized.
And we mentioned Notre Dame here, which I think Charles Deaton believed that was the
Yes.
best architecture, period. If you want a football stadium, that is the gold standard, is University of Notre Dame Stadium.
It is.
Which is still there, still standing today. It's been renovated, obviously, a few times, but and things added on or whatever. And that is what Arrowhead is patterned after, right?
At least the lower bowl is, Mm-hmm. And the way the upper part, especially of Arrowhead, sort of the big sculptural, it looks it's very sculptural, and that's sort of where he was coming from. Part of his idea that they continued to develop, again in partnership with Kivett Myers, was that those corners sort of reached up, and that's where the roof would come and sort of nest over the top of it.
Yes.
When you look at it, a lot of the brilliance of it, though, is they put more seats on the sidelines than they do in the end zones. And that in and of itself is a very smart thing to do, because who wants to be at the top of the bowl in the end zone?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So,
Although that is a great – I always think the best seat in the house at Arrowhead, to me, is the front row between the 20s on the third deck. There's nobody in front of you.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, you got a little leg room there. You can put your feet up on the edge, obviously. Don't put your beer up there. It's going to end up in the lower tier.
Right.
But that seat,
Yeah.
you can see everything, and I think that seat is an incredible seat at Arrowhead. Right?
Over time, I think owners of these buildings or teams have figured out even those upper deck areas, because there's nothing in front of you, those are premium seats.
Yeah, right.
And they can get premium prices.
It's just incredible. And to have that Arrowhead opened in the fall of 72.
That's correct.
And the K opened in the fall of 73. Those buildings are still standing.
Yes.
They've been renovated twice.
A couple times,
A couple times each. And now it's, I guess, time people are looking at, we need new stadiums,
Yeah.
Because I think the kickback would be, and I think part of the kickback is to spend those many, many millions of dollars in the way they're going to spend it to renovate it again, when you're going to have to come back in 15 or 20 years and probably do it again. Concrete's old.
Yeah.
Everything's old. Things are falling down. It's antiquated. The field's great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Fan experience is good, but it's antiquated.
Yeah. The interesting thing about both those buildings, because they are 50 years plus old, there are things that have changed that have really impacted the experience of the fan. There's a lot of great things, more legroom, more width, all these sort of things, more amenities. Those buildings are really intimate buildings, because since they were built, the ADA came about, which impacted the seating pool for everybody in some ways.
American Disabilities Act in order to get people in wheelchairs.
And the building codes have changed. Mm-hmm. And the premium seats, because they are so big. There's a great photo where Comiskey Park, the old Comiskey Park, was still standing when the new one was built. Same size field, but the building and the scale, and this is 1991 when the new Comiskey opened. The building was so inflated because of the things I just mentioned.
Right.
And those sort of things you can't replicate. But one of the big things is the comfort and the amenities that come with high levels, new ideas of premium seating.
Right. And, you're talking about the Astrodome, and you look at the Astrodome today next to Energy Stadium, and the Astrodome looks like the dressing room for the professional athletes.
Exactly.
So you just go, oh, my God, the scale is – they've added so much more to those buildings, because the field dimensions – now, baseball alters a little bit, but basically they're the same.
Right.
And football stadiums remain the same,
right.
the length and width of a football stadium. So
Yeah.
those things remain the same. It's
They do.
everything surrounding it that changes.
That's
right?
exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And that's what the market demands. And that's the prices that, owners are getting to, increase their wealth, but also pay for all the things that are incredibly expensive, which are the athletes.
Right, absolutely. And we're going to get 2 new stadiums here somehow. Right, somehow, some way. I'm sure this is the sports architecture capital of the world.
Yeah.
These companies will work together to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think the teams or the city or whoever gets it, whether it's Wyandotte County or Jackson County or wherever, Clay County, wherever they end up, they will probably demand that our sports architectural firms all get a little piece of the action to join together and design these things, make them state of the art, correct?
Yeah, there's, big projects of any scale, whether it be an airport or a big office complex, and certainly sports complexes or sports buildings. There's a lot of politics involved and a lot of money, and a lot of people want to have a piece of that for a variety of reasons. And I think whatever we do here, there'll have to be, in some way, likely several different firms that will team together, which is not unprecedented, certainly in our city.
Yeah, right, exactly. And for me, I'll give you a quick story here about the Truman Sports Complex. So I have no idea it's here, and I'm driving from Philadelphia and I'm going to San Francisco as I start my journey on how I ended up here across the table from you. And so I am driving through Kansas City, and I come upon, it just sort of comes out of nowhere on the left-hand side of the road, and it says Sports Complex, get off here, one of those things, and Truman Sports Complex. So I'm driving, and I see this in the distance just a little bit. I'm going, oh, my God, what is that? So I got off. This is 1974. Get off the highway, drive down, go through the gates, which were open, which surprised the heck out of me. Gates are open, parking gates, and I just drove up there and looked at these two buildings and just went, oh, my God, this is absolutely incredible. Yeah. And, of course, I was on my way, so I spent a little time. I took a couple pictures, as a matter of fact, and I wrote I was doing a daily log of my trip, and I wrote about the sports complex there and what I saw in Kansas City. And at the very end of it, I said, you know what? Maybe someday I'll work here.
Wow.
With a question mark, and then went on to San Francisco and drew about 15 other moves in my life that ended up in Kansas City, which was phenomenal. So that's my attachment to the buildings, and then covering all of those football games and baseball games inside that stadium, and all those exciting, championships and wins and everything else they were doing. It was incredible for me to end up coming back here. So it left a big impression on me. I think I was in my mid-20s by that time, but it was just, I'd never seen anything like it. Yeah. So it was almost like when the slaves got out of the carts at the Roman Colosseum, I looked up and went, how did they do this?
Yeah.
And then eventually I found out there was supposed to be a rolling roof. I went, oh, my God. Yeah. Why didn't that happen? Yeah. So they will design 2 new stadiums for here. Okay, now where are they going to be? Okay, never mind. I'm going to leave you off that hook. Okay.
Somewhere in one of 4 counties.
Yeah, right. Good answer. I like that answer. That's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. When you were researching and writing this book, was there one thing that just stunned you that you didn't expect, that surprised you when you were researching this?
Yeah. I will say that and I said this in my 40-plus lectures that I continue to give about the book and the history, is I thought, I didn't realize the impact that Ron Lubinsky had. I never worked for Ron. I worked in and around him a little bit on the Edward Jones Dome, update on that, after he had retired.
Right. That was not a good building.
No, and we were asked.
When it was the old TWA Dome?
Yeah.
Because I can remember when we sat in the press box.
Yeah.
Okay, just for me, I had to look over the edge of the desk in the press box to see the near sideline.
Which is sort of a cardinal sin in the business. But it is what it is.
Building it like this.
Yeah. But I think when I really got into research, and even though I had been in the business, at the time, 25 years, I didn't really understand how impactful Ron and his eventual core team
Ron Lubinsky now.
Ron Lubinsky, right. How influential he really was, and the visionary that he was, and the storyteller that he was, and the marketer. And he had 4 or 5 architects that he developed in the 70s who were all very young, who eventually 4 of the 5 stayed with him throughout the rest of his career, and they all became worldwide experts in baseball and basketball and hockey and football at the professional level. And of course, then there was bleed out of that to college sports. But Ron really did. There's another book that should be written. It was a detailed story about Ron's vision, and I'm
sure he'd cooperate.
From heaven.
From heaven.
Yeah.
He would be sitting on somebody's shoulder. Absolutely. Yeah.
But he really is the one. And I think a lot of his contemporaries are still alive. Guys like Bob Berkebile and Tom Nelson and Kite Singleton. And they all knew one another. And I think they all said, Ron, you're off your rocker. There's not a market out there. And, well, there really wasn't. But he actually found a way to get it going, and the rest of us have been beneficiaries of that.
Yeah, you have. And I remember I was with him the mid-'80s somewhere.
Sure.
And I think it was right around the time that the Royals were back-to-back American League. Well, they played in back-to-back American League Championship Series.
Yeah.
One against Detroit, they lost. And then next year, they won. They beat Toronto, and they go on and play in the World Series and win the World Series. But I remember he had me down there, and I mean, he was a force. Yeah. He was really a force. You talk about a self-promoter in a good way, and a believer in what he did. He was a believer.
He was. He totally did. And the firm he created is now, I think, 1,300 people strong. It's called Populous now. It was called HOK Sport back then. But they have 10 or 12 offices around the world. Their employees are very loyal, and they've sort of set a standard for a lot of us. A lot of us, followed. We may not have liked it, but we learned a lot, and we competed a lot. And at times, different firms would win different projects, and I got to be a part of that too. Yeah. Sort of on the other side of the table from Ron and his team.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more than competition. It's more than having the best design.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's politics. It comes down to politics, a lot of it, right? So,
that's right. Yeah. Well, especially when you get in these professional leagues, the owners are so tied together.
Yes,
you can certainly get a lot of strength from past clients who are all linked together at the table.
So it's good to have Clark Hunt or John Sherman on your side, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So the big four. At one time, and I know Populous is in the mix there, but HNTB, HOK Sport, Ellerby Beckett, and 360 Architecture.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then Populous is a conglomerate of how many of those? So
the interesting thing, there's no, every time I start my lectures on this subject, I always say there's not an elevator speech for this. But over a period of time, the four big firms, which were HOK Sport, HNTB, 360 Architecture, and Ellerby Beckett. They are all, three of the four now have different names.
Yeah, right.
So HOK Sport became Populous, Ellerby Beckett became AECOM, HNTB stayed HNTB, and then a firm that I was associated with as one of the senior owners, 360, we sold our firm 11 years ago to HOK, who wanted to get back in the sports business after the separation with HOK Sport, who became Populous.
So the elevator door just opened, and we're walking into
right.
We're walking into wherever.
That's right.
But responsible for tens of billions of construction projects.
Yes.
And you're not. The amazing part about having all the architectural firms here in sport is all the spin-off industries that build your buildings.
Yes.
I mean, construction firms and the parts, all those things too. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I've sort of tracked, I think there's 700 architects and staff in Kansas City in 21 firms that are doing sports work every day all over the world. Plus there's engineering firms, structural engineering, civil engineering, and especially mechanical, electrical firms that support that. And I think the revenues are somewhere more than $300 million a year just coming into the city from all the fees. And then the big dollars are obviously spent on the construction, which occurs most of the time out of Kansas City, out of town. But products have been developed, technology has been developed in and around the architectural, the creative, which none of this would happen if it wasn't sort of this big jigsaw puzzle of teams of engineers and architects and technology experts working together to create things to keep the industry fresh.
Right, and being on the ground floor as all these architectural firms were, and you talked about getting to know the owners is important, and knowing all those people who are associated with these sports teams around the world. We're talking soccer, we're talking all kinds of rugby, everything. it was great to know all of them first, and they got to know you, and you've built stadiums for them. Those stadiums have worked.
Yeah. Well, in my particular career, I actually, after I finished working on Madison Square Garden, I branched off into, or sort of landed happily, to renovate, be the lead architect to renovate Notre Dame Stadium. And after that, which was opened, it was the renovation the first time. They've since done another. In 1997, I just stayed in college sports, and my formula, which really wasn't too planned, was just follow the athletic directors you worked with to their next school. And some stay for 10 or 12 years, some stay for 5. But and I'm not the only one that has that model, but that relationship and that value, I'm still doing that. Even though I'm a consultant and semi-retired, I'm still doing that for a handful of athletic directors that I met 25, 30 years ago.
Right. And you have your own firm. You have your own.
I have my own one-person firm.
You're one person. It is A1A or AIA?
Yeah, it's AIA.
AIA.
It's
okay,
AIA. Yeah, it is.
Will you give it a plug?
Yeah.
Just call it
it's
AIA.
Yeah. It's T. Wagner Design and Consulting.
There you are.
There you go.
There you are. It's great. Okay. 30-year period.
Yeah.
From 1990 to 2020. I'm going to rattle these off. Okay. These are all these edifices were built, designed, whatever, by Kansas City architectural firms of one kind or another. Yeah. 20 of 27 MLB stadiums, 18 of 28 NFL stadiums, 22 NBA and 22 NHL. They are combined a lot of times. They both play in the same building. 14 MLS stadiums, and now you're also doing soccer-specific stadiums, which you're doing now. And then projects, of course, on campuses at KU. They're building their new building. KSU, the end zone situations. MU projects with the end zone and in the dressing room as well. Yeah. And then you have mixed-use developments like the P&L, right across the street from the T-Mobile Center. And esports gaming, which I really find interesting. Is that flying the indoor drones, giving them a building for that, or is it strictly them playing against one another on the games with the
well, there's all sorts of different,
on.
There's different types of esports, and there's a handful of esports buildings that have been built. I don't know if that's a trend or not, but I worked, one of the last projects I was involved with is Kansas State University's women's volleyball arena. It's 2,600 seats. One of the things Gene Taylor asked us to do is show us a setup before, along with concerts or graduation, show us a setup for esports. And that's a matter of just laying it out. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the buildings, I think there's a real attempt to try and keep the lights on more often in these buildings, which for an enclosed building, an arena, there's a lot more ability to do that than although a dome stadium lends itself to big scale, large scale events too, but an open air stadium, it's fairly limited what they can do. Sure. And so, cities, it'll be interesting to see what the Chiefs do and the city does. If there's a new building for the Chiefs, will it be a dome? Will it be a retractable roof? There's a price difference.
From my standpoint, it better be. Because I think that you talk about keeping the lights on, now all of a sudden we're going to be, he's promised that we get a retractable roof, Clark Hunt. Yeah. Super Bowl. Yeah. You're going to be in a Final Four rotation, no doubt, because of our connection to basketball with the Big 12 tournament and all that, and the excitement here. And then you can have your big indoor concerts during the winter. Right. I know you still have to worry about snow on the ground or whatever, but you have a building, instead of having a 22,000 seat stadium, you have I don't know how big it'll be, but we'll say at least 65 or 70,000 people in there for a concert because they'll have a lot of stuff on the floor, right?
It certainly would put Kansas City in a new level of market for those types of things, Frank. And one of the things that's obvious that occurs if you're able to get those sort of events, because the concert industry is probably alive and well like it hasn't been since probably the 80s, 70s, and 80s in some ways.
Since Michael Jackson.
Yeah. Is the ability to have hotel nights and food, beverage, transportation, all the things that come along with visitors coming. Yeah. Say if Taylor Swift was at a Chiefs Stadium for a series of events, not unlike I think Garth Brooks did 8 shows when the Sprint Center opened.
Yeah, they opened it. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah, so you need to keep the lights on, you need to keep people working, you need to keep it viable. So let's talk about the future. What would you like to see when they build these 2 new stadiums? What would your suggestions be to a Clark Hunt or a John Sherman about what you really should consider for your buildings?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is I think in the last several years, the premium seating, suites, loge boxes, club seats, whatever. There's dozens of different types of premium seats that have been developed. Some really exciting things over the years, and each firm will do it different and approach it differently. I think those things are going to continue to be very popular and very important. One of the things that's occurred too is for the average fan are these sort of party decks where you have a seat, but you can also go out. There's ones down on both end zones at the stadium in Arlington, Texas, or Irving, wherever Arlington, where the Cowboys play. It's a place to gather. Tampa Bay several years ago, I think, built a big party building next to their stadium. And you can't see inside the stadium, but it's it's wildly popular because people gather together to be there and hear the crowd, and the game's right outside, and you have some TVs. But I think the ability for buildings to be flexible too. I think architects are starting to look at the ability to have flexible premium seating, where you can not just have the same suite, but maybe over time, during the season, you rotate. Now, there's probably a lot of complexities and politics in that, but the ability for premium seating to start to be flexible too. I think when World Cup hits the United States here coming up, which is very exciting, I think we'll see a different way that stadiums look at themselves and look at their environments from a security standpoint.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's going to be really eye-opening and really exciting to see how that impacts our buildings. But putting us on a world stage is going to do just that in a lot of good ways, and hopefully nothing bad, but it'll be a whole different way of looking at how we treat our buildings from a security standpoint.
Would you suggest a dome? A cover, a retractable roof for Arrowhead?
I would. Well, if it's Arrowhead or a new stadium, that's
what I
possible.
meant for the new Arrowhead.
Yeah.
Okay.
The firm I most recently worked for, which was HOK, we put a fixed roof over Hard Rock Stadium where the Dolphins play, which is one of the first stadiums that Ron Levinsky designed that had and his team premium seating that was built in, Joe Robbie Stadium. But that roof alone was $450 million, and it had to straddle the existing stadium structure. It couldn't
because the stadium was already there.
Stadium Joe Robbie was built.
It was already there.
Yeah. So there are ways to do that. It could have been a retractable dome. It would have been more expensive, but that wasn't part of why the Dolphins and the city wanted that roof. It was to create shade and some rain protection in order to get a Super Bowl, and they got one a few years after that. But I think to sort of be in the game, you need something like that. There's the history and the tradition of having games outside here, but there's also some real sensibilities about being able to open and close the roof for different venues.
Yeah, and even have it to a point where, not permanently, but you could close it but not put it over the field level if you didn't want to. You know what I mean? Like you don't close it over the area of play, but you could protect the fans, and then somehow be able to then bring it all the way closed if it's really bad outside. Right. Innovations like that. What will be? We'll say any stadium now. Besides, it would be a new K or a new Arrowhead. What will be the things that they have to really look forward to? Is it the innovation and how quickly things are changing with the internet and being able to be on your phone and betting and all the other things that go along with it? By the way, in a Coliseum, you could bet in a Coliseum.
That's right.
In the from 0 to for their 500 years of existence, you could bet on who was going to live and who was going to die.
You could bet on the gladiators, and
now you can. Now we have all the sports betting.
Yeah, I think it's been a long time now that venue operators, team owners have figured out that you have to have incredible internet service. I mean, that's sort of a no-brainer. I know I was out at USC one year, and Pat Hayden was talking about, who was the athletic director at the time. They weren't getting students at games. Well, they figured out that's because they couldn't get service.
That's right.
And so they didn't own the building, but they had the city and others sort of up the whole technology. That's going to continue to be a given, and I think that all the technology. I know when my old firm, we worked on the Jets' Giant Stadium, MetLife Stadium, and one of the requirements there was, how do you change it if one team has a Sunday game, Sunday afternoon, Sunday night game, and the other has Monday night, which maybe happens once every 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
How do you change the stadium over? Well, part of it was because of the advent at the time of LED lighting. You could go from the Jets green to Giants blue with the flip of a switch. And the stadium, we designed it so that that was a big part of the look of the building. And also, how do you rotate the retail spaces? Well, we figured out it wasn't rocket science. We figured out you have these things that flip over, and it's Jets one day and it's Giants the next in terms of memorabilia. So having that flexibility is part of the design challenge of what architects are faced with having to do.
Yeah, right. What will be the hardest? Will be trying to leave some areas open to catch up to technology that can be added on somehow?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't work in
Yeah.
that arena.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think this, the scale of the stadiums, the ballparks and stadiums is so large. There's so much room for mechanical systems, life safety systems, all these things that are in place that technology seems to grow and grow, but it doesn't really grow in scale in a lot of ways. I mean, look how concerts have changed from the, speakers as big as cars to much smaller and a higher quality. And they weigh less. It's less to hang. It's less to
room.
move. It's less to move around from city to city. So a lot of that, I think a lot of the space is going to be there, but it's staying on top of what's going to happen. And all you can do is just sort of be aware and sort of guess and maybe be a part of developing those. I mean, with some of these scoreboards, like at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles or Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta, the scoreboards, or even Dallas Cowboys, the scoreboard is such an important, integral part of the experience of going there. And I've been to all three. It's unbelievable what that does to the experience of being there. A lot of people are watching that and watching the game, but that doesn't make it a bad experience.
Yeah, right. I was just going to ask you that because I've had several people get tickets late. Go to, they're trying to get into the Dallas Chiefs game. Okay, obviously on Thanksgiving Day.
Yes.
So there are the building's magnificent. You see it from outer space, Mercedes-Benz building. The deal is there are people up way high, okay, in the nosebleeds, we'll call them, for lack of a better word, is they end up watching the entire game on the giant screen that is around the middle of the field.
Yeah.
So you said it's okay? That experience is okay?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. Because
you're in there?
Well, you are, and the architects have with their ideas about what if we did this with a scoreboard, for example, may not even exist at the time they come up with it. And the owner, Arthur Blank, latched onto it when we were designing Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That was going to be a key component. But Daktronics, who I think was the eventual provider of that video screen, I don't think they knew how to have this 360-degree, 65-foot tall scoreboard and have it sort of work. And they said, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Now, they had 3 years or a couple of years to figure it out, it took a lot of time and effort. And then SoFi took it to a different level, a new level of what they have to do. So those partnerships have to sort of work to make the building and the experience great.
Okay, before we talk about the family, how much competition do you get from outside cities to try to become the sports architecture capital of the world, or you don't think that'll ever be taken away from Kansas City?
I sort of discussed it when I was writing the book and was finishing it up, trying to predict what was going to happen in the future in some ways. There are sports architectural firms that have cropped up in other cities. Almost every one of them, and we're talking maybe 6 or 8, every one of them has ties back to one of these 4 big firms. It's amazing. There's one in Dallas, there's one in New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Atlanta, sort of. But it all sort of stays here. And what's really great about that is, and it sort of gets us to why Kansas City is such a great place, with the critical mass being here, there are firms that have sports offices, satellites in other cities that are now, in the last year, there's been 4 or 5, have opened up offices in Kansas City because so much of the talent is here. It's a great city. It's a wonderful city. But all the critical mass is here, and they can lure people away. And it happens with the firms that have been here for 30, 40 years. All the time. Mm-hmm. You don't have to uproot your family. You have to change office buildings. And you might be working with people you've worked with, you likely will. And you're probably going to work on projects that you're familiar with and owners you're familiar with. So having it all, and it really does, everybody rises together in terms of not only the design, but the technology and the construction aspects of these buildings, which are so complex. It all just builds on itself, and it sort of stays here in a lot of ways. It's amazing, even though it's these firms have other offices, so much of it is here.
Yeah, right. That's where you just talked about 40 years of marriage. Yeah. There's obviously somebody behind you with the hand on your back saying, I wish you weren't home all the time. Get out of the house.
That's right.
Talk about the family a little bit. I know both of your daughters followed in your footsteps, and they're both architects.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, one's an architectural engineer. She went to Kansas State. And the other one has been doing business development in sort of the construction industry.
That's Kyle and Margaret, right?
That's right, yeah. And, it's really great. A lot of people will always ask, what is your favorite project or this or that? And I've mentioned a few that I've worked on. But, at one time or another, I got to be involved in both of their college lives. Kyle played college soccer at Elon University. I worked on their football stadium and their soccer stadium. I got to see her play in both buildings. Margaret, as an architectural engineer, works in the sports industry with a local engineering firm, Henderson. And she and I worked together on a big team on 3 projects at her alma mater and mine, Kansas State. So my last 3 projects of my career that I got to see built, which will probably be the last 3, I would guess.
Maybe.
I got to work on those with one of my daughters.
Yeah.
And work with the great AD, Gene Taylor, at my school. So.
Right. So you didn't regret the fact that your one daughter didn't follow in your footsteps, right? She went to Elon in North Carolina, right?
Yeah. That was great.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
All those years I was traveling, my wife, Peggy, she worked at KU Med Center. She was a speech-language pathologist, taught in their graduate school program there. She kept the girls going to sports, and both of them played, and both of them played at a level where we traveled a lot. So I'd come home from a week of being away and would hop in the car or hop on a plane, and nothing better than seeing your kids excel like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have Charlie and Harvey. They're your grandkids, right?
And Riley and George.
Oh, my gosh. You got a lot more now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's been 3 years.
That's good.
Yeah. I have 2 great sons-in-laws who are both great athletes in high school and continue to golf. But we have 5 grandkids now. So.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, it's
That's
wonderful.
Awesome. Talk about Kansas City.
Yeah.
And just what this place means to you and your family.
Yeah, it was really interesting. When I was, I think, in college, I really got introduced to Kansas City, although we had come up for ball games from Wichita to see the A's, see the Royals. It was in college when we did a couple of fictitious projects, and the sites were in Kansas City. It was a big city. It was a city that had hills. It was, it wasn't laid out on a grid so much. And I think that it was really exciting. I knew after college this is where I wanted to come work. Obviously, I've worked in other cities. Most of my projects take 5 years, so I get immersed in other cultures, which has been really wonderful. But even though I've had a few chances to move elsewhere and work, it's all about Kansas City for us. And, it's great to see it through your kids' eyes who one of my daughters worked in Paris for a while, in New York for a while. She came back here. The other one, did study abroad in Florence, Italy. They both came back here, and it's great to see this city through their eyes because it's been part of our lives for 43 years, and it looks different than it did for us, and it's very exciting to share it with them.
Yeah, it'll look way different to them, too, especially after the 2 projects get done with the 2 stadiums.
That's right.
Tom, thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Frank.
The book's incredible, folks. Designed in Kansas City by Tom Waggoner, How Kansas City Became the Sports Architecture Capital of the World. It is a fascinating read.
As I mentioned, I decided to sort of make the book into something that we had where there were 4 big firms, and how each, not only did they survive, and they still survive, look at all the firms that have come out of these 4 big firms. And that's what's really phenomenal, too.
Yeah, right. And here's the pick. You got that, Benz? That look pretty good?
Yeah.
This is the original design of the Truman Sports Complex with the sliding roof.
It is.
In the middle. That is unbelievable.
Yeah. It really was way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time.
And I remember a lot of people came here, and like Baltimore has done the same thing. Pittsburgh's done the same thing. They've all gone to 2 stadiums, right? In a certain area.
And that was Ron Levinsky's big idea, is that these round buildings didn't really work, and that other cities would do what Kansas City boldly did, incredibly bold, at a time when nobody did it, was to have sports-specific stadiums. Right. It seems commonplace now, but back then there was an idea you can have one stadium or 2 teams for the price of one.
And it took them a long time to get on board.
It did.
But that's another reason why there's just something about Kansas City, right, Tom?
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Frank.
Continued good luck to you and the family, and we love having you here, and we're going to make sure we maintain our title as the sports capital.
I think it will.
Sports architectural capital.
Yeah, good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, bye-bye.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is being made possible by the generous support of local partners like you. You can help us share these stories by becoming a sponsor today. Visit somethingaboutKC.org to learn more.